So I wish to thank all of you for coming here tonight and welcome to the Mohican Forum. As I say, we're going to try and not only start on time, but keep the comments brief enough that there will be ample time for you folks to ask questions. We'd like to thank Tom Brennan for agreeing to serve as moderator today. There are 3 panelists. I'm one of them. My name is Eric Miller. We also have Annette McCormick. Annette was a member of the Mohican Ad-Hoc committee that we'll be talking about later on. And Cheryl Harner. Cheryl is a naturalist and director of Flora-Quest and a director of the Richland County Park District. So each of us will make a brief presentation, and then at the point where it's question and answer, we're going to turn the mic over to Tom, and Tom Brennan will then be running the forum from that point onward. Now, I'll mention to you that we have tried, over the last few weeks, we have tried to get the Division of Forestry to come up here and participate in a forum with us. And we wanted to do that in order to keep the forum balanced. They never said no, they never said yes. So we decided to go ahead and have this forum. And hopefully, maybe in November or some future time, we can have a forum with DOF in somewhat of a debate format. In the meantime, we have asked Tom to restore as much balance to an unbalanced presentation as he can by favoring and encouraging pro-Division of Forestry comments and questions. So that's kind of the format as we go forward here. So I'll begin then with my comments, and I'll just say that when I look over the Division of Forestry plan for the Mohican Forest, what jumps out at me is that part of their plan is to manage the forest for timber and for the production of timber products. And right away that puts me at odds with them, because a forest, in my view, and in the view of the experts that we consult with, a forest can be managed as a natural ecosystem, or it can be managed as a timber farm. But it can't be managed to be both things in the same place at the same time. You have to choose, because the usages are just in inherent conflict. Now, the other thing that the Division of Forestry plan leaves out is any acknowledgement of the Mohican complex as a whole. Now, Division of Forestry has jurisdiction over 4,800 acres of land, and that's certainly a good bit of the Mohican complex. And if any of you picked up these little hot cards that we had out there, they have a little map of the Mohican complex. Just as an example, if you look over here, you've got a forest, you've got a state park, you've got Pleasant Hill Lake, you've got land owned by a Conservancy district that surrounds Pleasant Hill Lake. You have Malabar Farm State Park, and then all of this is connected even with Hemlock Falls. So together, what you have here is a very large complex, a complex that's almost 12,000 acres. 12,000 acres, of which the Division of Forestry is only 1/3, roughly. So we feel that the management of the Division of Forestry should take into account its role as being only one part of the Mohican complex. Now, if you think about what will attract tourists, what do tourists come to see? Do they want to see big tree stumps, or do they want to see big trees? Ask yourself that question. When we look at the Mohican complex, we also ought to think about all the businesses that surround the Mohican complex, from canoe liveries to campgrounds, and a host of other uses, hotels, motels, restaurants. The Mohican complex ends up becoming an economic engine that drives a lot of revenue for our community, tourism dollars and taxes. As a complex, it surpasses many of our national parks in size. It surpasses many of our national complexes in terms of the number of visitors over a given year. and it surpasses them in economic impact. You can look at the northern half of the state of Ohio, and within the northern half of the state of Ohio, there is no contiguous mass of forest that exceeds our Mohican complex. And so we would be asking the Division of Forestry to, if it's going to change its plan at all, change its plan in light of those overwhelming facts. Look at what's best for northern Ohio. Promoting the entire complex to the extent you can as a source of old growth woods and as a refuge is going to be the best thing, not only for the communities that surround the Mohican complex, but really for all of northern Ohio. So our position is we want to encourage all of you to try and urge your legislators to protect the division, to protect the Mohican forest, and that's the part that's under our Division of Forestry, to protect it as a refuge, and that would be the best use of that forest. Now, that concludes my remarks at this time. I'm going to hand the mic here to Annette. Well, Annette. Nancy there, if you would. Okay. Yeah, there you go.
My name is Annette McCormick, and I had served on the Mohican Ad-Hoc committee, but in 1994, I was just in the forest mushroom hunting and came across these trees that had blue paint splashed. There were hundreds and hundreds of them, literally thousands of them, for miles on the main trail in Mohican Forest. Main trail that horseback riders, backpackers, cross-country skiers, hikers, bird watchers, this was the main trail. And literally every big trail for miles was marked. So I kind of freaked out. And I contacted the newspapers and my state rep and my state senator. And I'm not going to really go into what happened in the 10-year period, but eventually the Division of Forestry agreed on their own for a commercial logging ban. And they decided they would protect a huge core of the forest, but there was a perimeter area of about 750 acres. They could do anything they wanted if it was to be done for educational logging. So they decided that their very first cut was going to be a clear cut for education, and a clear cut to show private landowners or the public what a clear cut's like.
It's showing on my screen.
I can see.
Hold the mic out.
Well, the slide, the picture that's supposed to be there is not there yet. Oh, I'm supposed to. Well, there's an aerial view of a clear cut, and it's hard to show it without having pictures on the wall. Anyway, the Division of Forestry claimed that this land, which was about a 10 to 11 acre area, was just a worn out old pasture, and that's how the land was when the state had acquired it 75 years prior to that. But the trees in this area were probably on average 125 to 175 years, with many reaching 200-year-old. And you might have seen earlier, there was a walnut tree with growth rings of 175 years, so a relatively small diameter.
There
Okay, there it is. that was a hickory tree that they left for a seed tree. But if you go down, if you go there now, you won't find any seed, any hickory underneath there. So next, Jeannie. So this shows just how big some of these stumps in here were. And the next one shows that was the walnut tree with 175 years. And then as you see, there's some were so large that only one would fit on a logging truck. And next one there. They would haul these logs and put them on the parking lot of the forestry's for their trucks and whatnot, maintenance building. And so they just bid them out to the highest bidder. Usually there were just 2 bidders, 2 different logging firms. Occasionally there were 3. And for weeks and weeks and months, this just went on. And as the trucks just pulled out of Mohican daily. So this timber sold for $57,844. That might sound like a fair amount, but the state spent well over $65,000 implementing that sale. So they had to have an education of some sort, which they promised. So next one there, they left a dead tree and put a sign that says wildlife tree on it. And then the next one still gets me here, the absurdity that precipitation access, it's like those pesky big old trees were going to hog all the water from the rain and never make it to the forest floor. It's crazy. So then this final one here, they put up a sign a little bit later, clear cut, and the benefits of the clear cut to tell the public. But at that sign, this is kind of at the top of the hill, there was a great big vista. But basically all you saw back then were dead treetops and dirt. So it's now 13 years later. I just took this the other day, and all that dark mass that you see, real dark part, it's a solid, thick layer of invasive species like bush honeysuckle, different honeysuckles, multiflora rose, autumn olive. They're not getting a young, healthy forest 13 years later. When I was going in to take this the other day, there were some hunters that were walking in, bow hunters, at Desk Rest and Concama. And I said, are you guys going to hunt in there? They go, well, heck no, there's nowhere to put a tree stand. So anyway, that's hopefully somebody, people have questions here. But that's my little part.
Thank you, Annette.
Well, I'm going to clip this on here because I'm not going to fight with it. How would that be? Well, thank you for coming out. I know you probably all have better things you'd like to be doing tonight, and quite frankly, honestly, I'd rather not be here today, but I'm compelled to be here. For it seems that every 2 to 5 years, we who love Mohican Forest again must campaign to protect it from the very people who supposedly are charged with its stewardship. We're all volunteers here. We're people who care and love Mohican. The paid professionals from forestry chose not to come. I'm not against timbering in general, and it's not easy for me to oppose Ohio Division of Forestry. I have a lot of dear friends in the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, and for years I've been cheerleading for the Ohio natural areas. I've spoken on behalf of the Division of Wildlife. I've worked with both state parks and natural areas and preserves. I love to support their efforts, and we want to connect people with nature. Nothing makes me happier than visiting those 300+ old white pines and hemlocks in the Clear Fork State Nature Preserve. They're surrounded by rare ferns and roundleaf orchids. I can wax poetic about black-throated blue warblers, wood thrushes, and the mystical song of the winter wren. There is so much more to Mohican than just trees. Hellbenders, those giant salamanders, they're incredible. Flora-Quest hosted an entire Mohican tourism event on hellbenders and hemlocks. We filled the State Park Lodge with ecotourism. And this is why I care about this creeping just a few acres more approach to cutting the forest. We tire of hearing sentiments like, an Ohio forest should have fewer pines, or it's for the health of the forest. It reeks of one of those commanders' incomprehensible justifications for a controversial attack in Vietnam. We had to destroy the village in order to save it. Well, I provide educational nature programming throughout Ohio. I speak of trees and wildflowers, butterflies and birds. 10 years ago, the Division of Forestry sent their employees to Flora-Quest in Shawnee. We worked together. Now, I cannot sit idly by and pretend this is the way the Division of Forestry has always operated. It is not. Personally, I'd be willing to work with Mohican Manager to align that old letter system to a number system, if that helps him read Mohican, as long as we do not reduce the protections on any of the forest as designated in the past plans. In fact, Mohican would better serve the Ohioans if it were all designated as a state park. Chief Boyles assures us that forestry is best equipped to make the decisions regarding the life and health of our forest. He even goes so far as to note that the science of forestry includes hydrology, mycology, entomology, and botany. And I agree with him. And yet, forestry has not one hydrologist on staff. Forestry has no entomologist on staff. There's no expert on fungus, mycology on staff. And forestry has to hire outsiders to do their botanical and their wildlife surveys. How can we believe forestry has an interest in the ecology or in the interconnectedness of forestry health when its employment roles say the opposite? In the Mansfield News Journal, Chief Boyles was quoted, "The pines were meant to prevent the soil erosion and conserve the soil long enough to allow for a future native hardwood forest." And yet, papers provided to the Ad-Hoc Council in 1997, they were given to them by the Division of Forestry. Those papers described pine plantations as being actively managed as late as 1970 to reduce the hardwood competition. In the same Mansfield News Journal article, Chief Boyles is quoted, "Anytime you do a monoculture, you're setting yourself up for failure." So on one hand, forestry tells us monocultures are bad. I believe that. On the other hand, it planted a monoculture of 400 American chestnut trees at the Clear Fork Gorge overlook. A monoculture to replace the acre stand of Scots pine they raised for pulp sales. Now, while I might have celebrated forestry's effort for discovery and science if those chestnuts were planted at the Discovery Forest, it was a bizarre misuse of State Park scenic picnic area. There are at least 10 different insects and diseases threatening to destroy our eastern forest. Among them are emerald ash borer, Asian longhorn beetle, hemlock woolly adulgin, southern pine beetle, oak wilt, gypsy moth, beech blight, on and on. We could cut down every tree. We could destroy them in order to save them. Or we could seek better pest detection and prevention pathways. Forestry is not clairvoyant. They have no crystal ball. We may prepare to battle southern pine beetle and find ourselves assaulted by wilt or gypsy moth. Forestry should spend less time cutting healthy trees and far more time and effort inspecting and diagnosing infestations and disease. in addition to establishing and educating a corps of public volunteers, people who care. To paraphrase Aldo Leopold, if the race of man were as old as trees, we might embrace the Mohican Forest as a plant community and not as an industrial timber lot. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Cheryl. Okay, at this point, I'm turning over the mic to Tom, and Tom will take questions, and it's your forum, Tom.
Thank you, Eric. As Eric said at the beginning of this, we want to try to make this as balanced a discussion as we can. And as Eric also indicated, the folks from the Department of Forestry weren't able to be here. So is there anyone who's here who represents the interests of the Forest Department, or who wants to speak on behalf of the Division of Forestry's plan? We want to start with that and give you sort of first dibs here in order to balance this presentation. Anyone here? I don't see you. Raise your hand. Just jump up.
Right here, in the back row.
All right. Go ahead.
I'm not here necessarily to support the plan or disapprove of the plan, but I'm here on my own merit as to what I feel should be done in reference to forest. I do agree with the majority of active forestry management. I believe that we have professionals that are very well equipped to manage forests that we have seen with the recovery of forests throughout Ohio. I will say this, that a longtime resident of the Mohican Forest area, moved there in '69. The pine trees that are in question now, a lot of them were probably about as high as I am now. And over the years, what I've seen is a steady decline of diversity in those forests. The pines that were once pretty good havens for wildlife, the thermal cover, or whatnot, have now declined as far as wildlife value because there are nothing but monocultures with no understory. I get some of the points these people are trying to press here, but I think it's a bit convoluted and one-sided. I'd like to know what the premise or what the idea is for oak forest revival, renewal. I mean, if you look at some of the oaks, the black oaks are all going downhill because they've reached the age class where they are starting to go downhill. What are you going to do for oak regeneration if you're just going to sit by and watch it? Because it's not going to happen on its own. Early successional stage wildlife habitats are only rarer than wetland habitats. 60% of Ohio species depend on early successional stage habitats. So, I mean, you can paint clear cuts as horrible and bad, but if you look at a lot of the clear cuts, the majority of them, there is renewal, there is revitalization, and there is thriving populations of wildlife in them. So, I remember sitting in some meetings, I'll use this to prove a point, that although some people may be well-intentioned, I don't know that they're as well-informed as they think they are. Because I remember sitting in a room like this a number of years ago as gypsy moth had invaded the Mohican Forest. They were on private land, and some of these same individuals were here against forestry's plan to spray a natural product, BT, to combat the gypsy moths. And I hate to think of what would have happened if they would have had their way, as they want to now, reference the gypsy moth problem, because if you look in western Pennsylvania, parts of New York, all you're going to see is skeletons of oak trees. And they were in private land, they were on the public land, and it was a very scary thought, the fact that somebody was going to pose some realistic, pragmatic solutions to a problem that really, really could have gotten out of control. There are no gypsy moths now, so I'm glad that forestry did have its way and did work with landowners to do something proactive with forest management. And I really hate to see, whatever group it is, to make active forest management a bad word, because it isn't. As evidenced by the increase of forestry stocks in Ohio, It's kind of an insult to the people who do practice good forestry measures, who do have progressive woodlots, actively harvest, and actively have a lot of practices, forestry practices that do benefit wildlife. So that's my statement of fact. I just think it's something that no use isn't necessarily wise use. Good conservation is a wise use of an area. It's not just about timber sales and timber dollars. I mean, that's part of the equation here, but to me, it's more of we need to concentrate on some active forest management, or your forest is declining over time. There's no oak hickory regeneration if you don't do something. And I'd be happy to show anybody who wants to see some of these areas where it is a biological desert, be it under some of the big oaks or definitely in the large pine plantations. And I think it's kind of an insult to our veterans when you would predispose what they might think. I don't think they would be against active scientific-based forestry management. It's not an insult to them. Actually, it's a tribute to them that we care enough about our forests that we're going to do something to maintain them and further them for the future. So thanks for your time.
Yeah, could we get your name, sir?
Dennis Solon.
And you're not involved with the Division of Forestry, or just?
I am here to represent my family and myself as a resident of the Mohican area.
Okay. Now, you had indicated before you had a question. Do you have any questions you would like to pose to the panel related to your sense of this, to get us?
Well, it's just, it basically is about I mean, you could get up there and you could have a good slideshow or a good PowerPoint to promote any position you want. We all know that we can make facts, say what we want, we can make pictures if you pick and choose. Forestry doesn't want to come in there and clear cut the 6,000 acres in the Mohican Forest area. But there's some places that, I mean, just take one fact like the red pines that they took out. Those were diseased. Red pines are not necessarily a vibrant growing species in Ohio. They were on the decline, so didn't it make more sense to do something about them instead of just let them go downhill? And as I've stated before, a lot of the species have reached maturity, and the problem is, yeah, you can just let them fall to the wayside, but if you don't do some active management, you're not going to have that next generation of the forest hickory ecotype out there. And I think we do need some active management, and it's scientific-based management as opposed to emotional management. I mean, nobody loves a tree in this room more than I do, but I am a very pragmatic person when it comes to management of our resources, be it wildlife, be it plant, be it forestry. I think we have to look at a bigger picture instead of just a very narrow focused view. And I'd like to ask those people who were, and some of them, I don't know, maybe you remember me, maybe you won't, but you were so against the spraying for the gypsy moths, and I thank God that somebody somewhere said we're going to do it anyway, because there's a lot of trees that are in that area that you could enjoy now because of that very reason. I'm all for leaving some stands of the older trees, but I just, I look at that walnut, and you can make it sound like, boy, that's a really old tree, but you look at the diameter of it, it shows that that tree, the growth was actually repressed, because a walnut of that age should be a lot bigger.
No.
In a healthy managed forest, you would have a
That's
lot bigger
not
sized
true.
walnut at that age class.
That's just not true.
This is the
Does
forest
anybody up front want
Accurate.
to address the gentleman's point about the management of the pine growth, cutting it versus, in his way, to regenerate the forest versus leaving it go? Eric, or anyone want to address
Not the
that?
pine, sir, it's the oak forest, the regeneration.
But you were defending taking down the pine.
Because the pines are biological deserts at this stage, they have very little overstory. They're each individual tree, they're tightly packed together. And if you look across, you can see for hundreds of feet. And in the winter, there's no wildlife cover. It's just a biological
Right,
desert.
but that's the point. I was asking them if they would like to respond to
Sure.
your description of that. Anyone?
I'd just like to respond about forestry in general and timbering is a great thing. I mean, there are a lot of private individuals in Ohio. 97% of our timber products come off of private land, 97%. There's no shortage of timber product in Ohio, and that's a good thing. There's no shortage of successional land on private property because there's plenty of timber. So the last 3
Let
to
her finish. Let her
5%,
finish.
the last 3 to 5% of timber products come from our state forest. And so that's what we're discussing, is the state forest land. And I'm not against timbering in a lot of the state forests. So you've got Zaleski, you've got Shawnee, you've got these large expanses. Even the foresters will tell you that Mohican is very different. It's very peculiar because, first of all, we have all these gas wells. So they can't manage it with a fire regime, which is what they do to create oak in Shawnee and Zaleski. They burn and they believe that that will create more oak for the future. We're never going to be able to burn in Mohican. It's not going to happen unless you want to see the whole gas system go up. So that's another good reason why it should be treated differently than other state forests. Thank you.
Could you address specifically his point as he described the pine forest as a biological desert and that it needs to come down in order to create?
I would disagree with that. There are plenty of places, if we go out, I could show you the mycology, I could show you the fungus, I could show you so many things in our forest. We have blackburnian warblers, we have wood thrushes, we have winter finches that come to Mohican that are nowhere else in Ohio. They're here because of our pines. And so we have what is called a novel ecosystem. This system wasn't here 100 years ago, but it's been here over 50 years, and the birds and the wildlife have responded.
All right. Somebody over here had a point.
Does anyone know, is there a public
Can you
commenting?
identify yourself?
I'm sorry, Dan Hardwick. I actually grew up right down in that area, right across the street from Malabar Farm, and the other side of the property touched there on by Pleasant Valley, so familiar with the area. Is there a public commenting period? Because I remember, was it 20 years ago, when the state made some proposals and they made some, adjustments to the local community, there was a period where they took public comment, or is this just, this is our plan, and does anybody know?
I believe the public comment period expired on October 1st, although the Division of Forestry has indicated they will continue to accept and review public comment, but the official period closed at the end of September.
And maybe there's been communication that I'm not privy to, maybe I missed the article in the paper, but from what I've read, I see the state's position being made, and I see the local folks saying, given their position, saying, well, there's cons, and there's problems with the state's position, but until this gentleman spoke, not one time have I ever heard the state make any kind of educated, legitimate response. Their response has been just to restate their position. They've never at all, until today, is the first time you ever heard any even attempt. Correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, has there been any response from the state to any of?
Well, I believe Chief Boyles talked to the News Journal. There was some discussion in News Journal articles about the state's position and the thought behind the management of the forest, similar to what this gentleman said.
Well, what I hear when I've read those is just a restatement of this is our position, not a, like this guy was doing, saying, well, actually, there's another side. To me, that's what needs to happen. And you got to have a discussion, in order for that to happen. You got to have, an exchange of information to get to that point. And that's what I'm not seeing happening. But maybe I missed it. What happens to the emerald ash borer once they go through and they kill? Are there other trees that they eat? Or could those be brought back?
No, emerald ash borer strictly eats ash. And so there are young ash that are being recruited right now. There are a lot of young ash coming up from seed. When a tree dies, oftentimes it throws off a lot of seed trying to replace itself. And what will happen is these young trees will grow, but emerald ash borer won't attack them until they're at an older age, somewhere between probably 3 and 5. I'm not totally sure the mechanics of that. So there's a very good chance that it's still out there. It could hit again with a later ash tree, but it's strictly reserved to ash.
So do they die? Do they die off because they lose
I don't know if we've never had this experience before.
Right.
So for me
Yeah,
to just
it's all
come up
new.
with answers, we've never lived through a devastation of emerald ash. If we compare it to things like the chestnut blight disease, at the time chestnut blight disease attacked in America, the general thought was, oh, cut down all the chestnut you can and use it as fast as you can before it's wasted. Now we're finding on occasion healthy American chestnut trees, and now we have to wonder, maybe if we had waited, we could have found some that were genetically resistant. And so now we're modifying trees to have a genetic resistance. So it's all a matter of science, and there's so much science that could be done and should be done by forestry. They do have a small division that works on this, and I would love to see them really create a volunteer community and really do a lot of education, because people need this information. We need to know what to look for in the future.
One of the brilliant points I think that Eric made that I'd love to hear a response to is just the whole idea of, you know, you cut a tree and you just let it lay, and you don't, it creates a whole ecosystem of critters that thrive on that decomposing tree, and that's missing if we log it and get rid of it. I mean, that's just question, points like that. I mean, there's a lot of them. I would love to hear the state's response to these things.
All right, let's keep it moving here, because I know folks have some questions right here.
Thanks, Tom. My name's Gary. I have a confession to make. I love trees. And I've cut an awful lot of them. I worked as a logger for 4 or 5 years in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. And I am also a veteran. Okay? And as a returning veteran, when I first landed in New Hampshire, I got to see my first national forest. Up in the White Mountains, and so I take this hike with a pal. We hiked for 2 days, we never saw a single mature tree. Not a single mature tree. Those were best practices of the forestry department during those days. Okay? I made a livelihood using forest products. Carpenter and cabinet maker. So I'm not a scientist. I don't really know all the ins and outs of how things work with regards to the science involved in forest and healthy forest and whatnot. But I've owned woodlots over the years. Had a 40-acre woodlot, primarily red oak. Gypsy moths came there. And in June, the defecation was like rain. The whole 40 acres, it sounded like rain, okay? They ate every single leaf in sight. I never did a thing. Those oaks came back just fine. Now, if that happens each and every time, I have no idea, okay? I don't know that. I don't have an answer to that. But I left those alone. And there was another thing I wanted to say about the white pine. There's a fellow who wrote a fantastic book called Tall Trees, Tough Men. And the white pine forest provided one of the very first economies for the settlers who came over from Europe. Magnificent white pine. Of course, those are all long gone. There's not a single virgin forest left anywhere that I'm aware of, maybe at least in New England and New York. But that monoculture stretched from New Hampshire, Vermont, all the way across the state of New York and into Pennsylvania. Nothing but white pine. White pine's 13 feet in diameter. So is that a mature white pine? I think so. I think if they are left alone to do what white pines will do, you'll have a magnificent forest someday. I don't know that for sure. You know, I'm not a scientist. But one thing that I have learned over the years is there's a great deal of pressure, economic pressure, to harvest forest products. And like I said, I benefited from those. I'm not opposed to cutting trees. I cut a lot of them, like I said. But my feeling is, as a returning veteran, I should be able to go see a forest. As a kid, I should be able to go see a forest with big trees. You know, leave some big trees to our future generations so they can see what a forest really looks like without being managed. And I think that the early settlers were the ones who got to benefit from seeing what a really unmanaged forest can look like.
Gary, I'm going to take your comments
All right.
and turn it into a question for the
All
panel.
right.
What would be the optimum growth for this pine forest down there in your view? You know, how big? I think someone indicated they're like 2 feet now, or is that correct? Or how large could they get? What is the future of that pine grove? Or is it all going to die and fall down, or what's your sense of it? Cheryl, you may be able to.
That's a native white pine in that picture. This is a gentleman named Daniel Boone, and he is a direct descendant of the Daniel Boone. And that's at the Clear Fork Gorge, and he is in front of a white pine and is probably 300 plus years old. We often hear that our white pine is not native. We do have native white pine in Mohican, and we're very proud of it. Red pine is not native necessarily to Ohio, but it's not that far away. When you look in Canada, when you look in Pennsylvania, when you look in New York. So those are trees that are native nearby.
I'd like to add.
Tom, let Annette add.
Tom,
I'm sorry?
I wanted to add to that a little
Sure.
bit. Gary, in Michigan, there's an area called Hartwick Pines, and it's 40 acres of old growth that back in the 1700s, someone had the foresight to keep that one small grove clear. And it had always been since the 60s a place I wanted to go to, which I finally did in 2015. Well, now when I've come back to Mohican, I have found trees just as big as those white pines. The people come from all over the world in Michigan to visit. It's part of the Old Growth Forest Network. It's a huge tourist thing for people to just walk through that small 40 acres. Well, they have 40 acres that they want to cut this year that the division has marked on a map. And I've gone to those areas. They were well thinned back decades and decades ago. And they're on the way. And they want to cut those this year. It's not the little tight pine plantations that they're going after this year. It's some beautiful big white pines with beautiful understory plants, small hardwoods coming up, healthy understory. But we have that opportunity. A white pine can live up to 500 years old. So the forest you're talking about is easily something that Mohican could have and cherish. But these new plans, they want to eradicate all the white pine in time. Only 20 or 40 acres a year, but that's not going to take very long to wipe them all out.
Tom, can I just finish with one?
Sure.
So what I wanted to sum up with was, I don't know the right or the wrong, like I said, I don't know the science, but process is important. And if I'm to understand what I've been told and what I read in the paper, this whole new idea was sprung on you guys that have been involved in this for years. So I just wanted to voice a protest to the process. The process needs to be far more inclusive and open.
Who else has a question or comment?
Right here.
She's had her hand up for a while.
She's had her hand up for a long time.
Go ahead.
Hi, my husband and I drove up from Harrison County. My name is Dr. Randy Prokladnik. I have my PhD in environmental studies, and I did my dissertation research on non-timber story products. So I looked a lot at medicinal plants and funguses and things that you would find underneath developed canopies. I've been to a lot of old growth forest, and I can tell you that our forests are in trouble, If you pick up a book by Charles Little, The Dying of the Trees, he will tell you some of the tree species that are gone forever, and we're never going to get those back. I find it disturbing that the proposal is to restore historic forest. I don't know if you've read much about climate change, but the Army Corps of Engineers and the University of Maryland just published a study about climate change and specifically looked at the state of Ohio and how our climate is going to change. So right now where Mohican Forest is sitting, that is going to become drier, significantly drier, and the trees that people want to restore are not going to be able to live in those places anymore. The hickories and some of the oaks, they cannot survive the kind of dryness that that area will eventually see. And I get really upset when we discount these older pine trees. These older pine trees are sequestering carbon dioxide to help keep climate change at bay. And they've already done studies where they found out now that it's the opposite of what they thought it was, that younger trees grow fast, so therefore they sequester more carbon dioxide. But it's not true. They're finding out now that larger trees actually sequester more carbon dioxide. And one of the people on the panel brought up the fact that deer predation. Anybody who's ever tried to grow any kind of hardwood trees in a field with deer, and we have a hideous issue with the deer population, Tuscarawas County, Harrison County, down where I'm from, you can't plant a hardwood tree and expect it to survive. So thinking that you're going to restore this forest back to the historic forest of yesteryear, it's not going to happen. Those species, a lot of them will never come back, and the ones that you want to plant, they're just not going to be able to survive. And I've seen clear cuts. I've seen clear cuts in Kentucky and in lower West Virginia for mountaintop removal, and in other forested regions down in North Carolina. And I was trying to look at non-timber forest products. They don't come back, folks. Once they go in there with the logging trucks, they crush trilliums, some of the perennial plants that have tuber roots, and the seed banks are gone. So thinking that you're going to justify that these clear cuts will help regenerate. I've been around. I looked at these for 6 years. They don't regenerate.
Okay, over here, we have a question.
Hi, my name is Jack, and I grew up in Rondo. I spent a lot of time in the forest. The present neighbor there, I have a stepmom. And I take great pride. Now, recently, I found out that there's this thing they call a plague. They call it the best kept secret of our forest managers. And it's the Asian honeysuckle. It grows to 20 feet tall. When it gets into a clear-cut area, it takes over. Deer can't go through it. Man cannot go through it. Everything under it dies. It basically kills your forest. And it creeps into the forest. And they claim, once it starts, in 20 years, it'll wipe out that forest. That's what scares me.
Is the honeysuckle there now?
Yes.
Is that one of
And
the...
they call it a plague. Go on the internet if you don't believe it.
Annette, maybe you could talk a little more about some of the invasive species. We're hearing the state belief is that the hardwood trees will come back. We're hearing some folks question that. You were raising the issue of potentially invasive species. Can you just chat a little bit about that?
Yeah, the plant you're talking about is sort of a viney climbing thing, and you can see
No,
that.
this is a bush. This is a bush. This is a bush. Asian
Okay, but
honeysuckle bush.
yeah, that's what, when I show that dark area underneath where the clear cut was, that's almost solid, what I would call bush honeysuckle or a moor honeysuckle, but it's also
It can
called.
grow 30 feet in 2 weeks.
It'll have a stem like that and then a great big bushy area like that, but there's also other kinds of climbing honeysuckles that will just carpet, almost like what you hear about kudzu, just starts to cover everything. And in Mohican, because of the disturbances in the past, and especially that 2004 clear cut, it's just thick. If you did a clear cut maybe 50 years ago, we didn't have these invasives yet, and maybe a young forest could have gotten started. but now they're everywhere. There's a tree of heaven starting to just amass in there. There's a lot of the invasive species like autumn olive that the government pushed on people and sold, and they're still selling invasive. Burning bush, everybody has burning bush. Burning bush are now thick in the forest, everywhere you walk. They pull up easy if you get them when they're young, but you know, I pick up like a giant armla and I go, I could take these to Walmart and they sell for $16 for a gallon pot. People are still buying this stuff because the nursery trade won't not sell the things that are popular. When there's so many native species that people could be growing, and then when things spread, that's what would spread and it wouldn't hurt. But these Asian invasives are just rampant in the forest now.
It's spread by,
Well, the birds eat the bird.
and also by the berries.
Yeah, well, the
So
birds
it's
eat the berries
very
and
hard
they
to
spread.
eradicate. And
So,
once it gets in there, you can't walk through it.
so if forestry would work on these invasives instead of having plans to make all these new impacts and disruptions that are just going to even make it worse, if they could just even try to get a handle on how bad it's become, you know, they'd be a lot better off.
Who else has a question or comment? Raise your hand, right there.
Tom, may I respond then to an earlier
Sure.
series of comments? Dennis said, and I'm sure he believes, that we have emotion on our side and forestry has the experts on their side. And they may be experts at running a tree farm and producing timber products. But when it comes to understanding a mature old-growth forest, the fact is, we have the experts on our side, and our experts surpass their experts. And the recommendations we're making, we are basing that upon nationally recognized experts now. Joan Maloof, she's the director of the Old Growth Forest Network. We're preaching to you chapter and verse what she puts in her publications. Paul Newt, nationally recognized expert within the top certifying organizations, a nationally recognized expert. Steve McKee can't be here today. And by the way, we tried to get Paul here when you know that we're both on vacation, otherwise I wouldn't be on this panel. But I can tell you, we are preaching, the three of us are preaching what they have taught us over the years. And Steve teaches plant identification to naturalists employed by the National Park Service. So I'm sorry, but if you, and I know the Division of Forestry people say we have the experts, and we concede their expertise in tree farms. But when you get to what it means to have an old growth forest, now we have the experts. I'll put their publications against anyone in Division of Forestry. And beyond that, a test that we would gladly agree to is, let's go into an old growth forest an old growth forest area. I'll bring one of our experts. And you bring a staff member from the Division of Forestry. And our gal or our guy is going to identify more insects than they can, more salamanders, more plants in the understory. I've been out in the woods with these forestry experts, these timber experts. They know their trees. They know what trees have value. They know which trees are going to go to market and sell. They know which ones aren't worth taking out right now. They know that. But then you start asking them about plants growing under the trees. Well, they don't know what they are. And why should they? Because it doesn't matter for the line of work they're in. I would compare it with a prairie expert. We have experts when it comes to prairies who can identify 400 different plants growing in a prairie. Now, they don't know how to raise grain, but you bring a grain farmer in to that prairie, he can't tell a prairie plant from a weed because he's a grain farmer. Grain farming is his expertise. So folks, I know you'll hear it said over and over again by Division of Forestry people who truly believe what they're saying. But give me a chance to line up my expert against theirs in terms of actually understanding and appreciating the complexity of an old forest that's gone to full maturity. And our experts are going to, I hate to tell you, our experts are going to clobber their experts. within the area of their expertise.
Eric, you had indicated before that you felt that this was really, from the state's perspective, really about timbering. Has the state or anyone placed a dollar value on that stand of pine?
I meant to look this up before I came here, but pine sells by the ton. So you cut pine, and the market is, it sells by the ton. And it doesn't sell for much. Now that's when we get to another issue about invasives. The state Division of Forestry has said they don't have money to remove invasive species. They have said that. It's not in their budget. We have people within our organizations who are removing invasive species from our old growth woods. And I'm talking about thousands of hours have been put in removing species from old growth woods. Now, why would people do that? Why would they give their time and give their money to remove invasive species? Well, they only work in forests that have been committed to protection. So if you want to rally volunteers to save your best forests, well, you have to find, first of all, your best, most mature forests, and then you have to put them under legal protection. And then it's possible to motivate volunteers to pay for invasive removal. There's a simple economics to it. Tom, if I may, I will contrast that then with what the Division of Forestry is proposing to do. They want to go in and cut down pine trees and remove them, which means it requires equipment. Now, you take that equipment in, you tear up the ground with your equipment, you compress the soil, and now you haul out these pines of marginal value. Where are you going to get the money to pay for doing that removal in a way that minimizes forest disturbance? Where are you going to get the money to pay for purging your equipment of the invasive seeds that are embedded in the treads and the mechanisms of your equipment? You can't pay to cleanse your equipment and remove those logs without tearing up that forest and making the invasive problem worse. You can't do that because there's not enough market in the pine trees that are going to be shredded and sold by the ton. So that would be part of our response on this issue of invasives.
And you're still skeptical on this idea that the hardwoods would regenerate. I think Director Boyle said that the whole project, including getting the native hardwoods there to grow and be relatively mature, could take up to 50 years. Does that not pass the reasonable test for you?
Yes.
I'm going to defer to Annette.
I don't think Bob Boyle is at all aware.
Throw it out there, Annette.
Bob Boyle is not aware of the historical significance of the white pines in Mohican. And if you go back and find old books from the 20s or early publications when the forests were first started in the late 20s and early 30s, they would come and talk about how rare white pines are, except in the Mohican region of Ohio. And if the other day I was taking some photographs of some of the gas wells, and they had made huge clearings. What's growing there now? And these are areas that didn't even have white pines, because they took huge hardwoods out of these areas, like the size of football fields. It's a blanket of white pine. Blanket. They are what want to grow in Mohican and the majority of the area. So even not like in that, they did a 5-acre clear cut of pines, and they planted a hickory or a chestnut, experimental chestnut farm there that's in the outskirts of Mohican. So I was going in there the other day because at least half of those are dead. Probably way more than half of those are dead. And what's growing up all around? Little baby white pine trees. That's what wants to grow at Mohican. So if they think they're going to cut the pines and maybe get hardwood, it's just not gonna happen. But just 10 miles away, like in the Malabar region, you would have solid hardwoods. It's just a unique feature about Mohican Forest on a big portion. And there's big white, not just in the gorge area, there's other areas in Mohican that have pre-settlement white pines. I mean, they're huge. They're 200 to 300 years old, dotted within oak trees. It's just an amazing oddity that Mohican has these white pines, and they should be cherished. And people, you know, tourists come, they love a pine forest. You know, there's just something really, really unique about it. And for them to go back on their promise that they gave 20 years ago, there would be no commercial logging, there would be a huge core that would be allowed to eventually grow to old growth status, and even in the area that they were allowed to do single tree selection, it had to be done with minimal disturbance and still keep a canopy and eventually be old growth. They're throwing all that out the window, all those promises they made 20 years ago. And you know, something's just got to be done that they are more aware of what's there now and not try to take it away.
This is just a question. What if the Boyles called you tomorrow and said, okay, I hear what you're saying, we'll only take half the pine forest?
What would I say? I'm actually really glad of the areas that they did thin in the past. Mohican had a very unique situation when they planted all these pines. 3Cs planted these pines. They had what was called a post plant, and they had a market for these small trees that they could take out row after row, because then they soaked them in creosote and they supplied the entire state, the different state forests and the edge of state highways when they needed these posts. Well, in the 70s, when they realized how toxic creosote was, they had to close that situation. They could no longer soak these posts in creosote. And that whole area where that was actually became a Superfund site, which is now the mountain bike staging area parking lot. They never did anything to remediate the problem of the toxicity. They just kind of left it go. But they don't have that opportunity for those trees anymore, so then they just sat just no one ever cut them. They just sat there. So in my opinion, there's areas that really could be thinned carefully without big equipment in order to let the white pines have more use. In 1995, they sold 8,779 pines in an area of 58.5 acres. And they couldn't even find an Ohio firm that would be wanting to bid it. So they sold them to Canada. And so Ontario, great big logging trucks from Ontario, load after load after load. So they made $16,650. That came to $1.89 a tree. Those were trees that were 60 to 70 years old. And so after expenses, it was about 65 cents a tree. So if you go to that area now, luckily they left a lot of the white pines, which now have a lot of space. So those white pines are now doing fantastic. But they claim they did this for hardwood regeneration, but there's hardly any hardwood regeneration in there. There's some little kind of fiddly red maple and some early successional sassafras or whatnot. But they didn't get it. But you can still walk in there. It's been 23 years later now, and you can still feel the ruts. You can feel the compactness of the soil in that 58.5 acres. So if you, like you asked, what would Bob say? I am not opposed to some thinning, careful thinning, where you would promote those white pines to grow up big. And as far as the red pines go, they have the man talking about the desert of it's not the greatest on those red pines, in my opinion. If they want to have a hardwood forest so bad, or attempt to have a hardwood forest, at least take the non-native red pines and Scotch pines and whatnot. So, I mean, other people would say, oh, that's terrible, just let them die. But I don't really have a problem with some thinning.
Who else has a question right here?
We've heard of their plan to start the hardwood forest by taking down the pines. We've heard the experts on one side say their theory is this. We've heard the experts on the other side say their theory is that. Has anybody actually done this? Or are we just talking in theory at this point?
Great question.
In the state forest, I'm very familiar with Shawnee. When we started Flora-Quest, we were down there for 7 years. And that's one of the places that they've done a lot of burning. And because state forestry believes that if you burn forest, you could promote oak recruitment. And one of the things we've asked over and over is show us your transects. Show us your scientific areas. Show us where you've burned this year, and we can go back and find that now we have oak recruitment or new young oak next year or the following year. And we've never seen those. We've asked, and we've never seen. So I would love to be taken out and shown a transect, a scientific survey, a plot. Joan Maloof, the expert that Eric refers to, says that on the eastern forest, they burn their pines to suppress oak. So how is it that you can burn and say that you're going to gain oak, and yet in the east they burn to suppress oak? So someone's right, someone's wrong, and I've never seen a transect yet. And I'd love to see one. I've asked for years.
Other questions?
I have two questions, and I might be misunderstood. Were the trees not to have been thinned through the years already, but they were not thinned? Selective thinning through the pines, is that, am I understanding that correctly?
Are you asking me?
I'm asking anyone.
They did a lot of thinning before because they had that post plant. And so, and there's, you can see the ones that have a lot of space, and then including the area of the 40 acres they want to cut this year. But there are other areas that they are pretty close together.
Right, so my understanding was prior years, those trees were to be thin, but they were not. Is that true?
Because they lost their ability to have the posts be utilized,
So they just
sort of
just
gave up,
okay.
and they just stopped.
So we don't know that the state will follow through with what they're saying now, and be honest, based on the past?
Well, no, because they are claiming they want to eradicate all the pines systematically over a long period of time by taking 20 to 40 acres every year, starting now.
And do we know what the state wants to do with the money that they would make from these trees?
There's a portion that goes to the township, a portion that goes to the school system, a portion that goes to the general fund, but that's not always kept the same. Sometimes,
So
some
not to
years-
eradicate invasive species?
Well, they already said they don't have the funds to do that, so.
I think the state's portion, forestry, would be 35% is what they would keep. The rest would go to local schools, townships, and county.
If I may respond to that, I wouldn't have a problem with thinning of some of, especially the red pine plantations, if they cut trees and dropped them, and that tree would biodegrade over a period of decades. That would be one thing. Then you can send in 1 or 2 people with chainsaws. You're not bringing in equipment, and you're not causing all the disturbance of dragging out a pine log of marginal value when you can't afford to drag that thing out in a way that's careful, that avoids damage to the forest. You can't avoid the introduction of invasives by the introduction of your equipment.
Over there.
We should be aware that, I think the legislature pretty much told Division of Forestry that they need to make money. Well, we know the budget's in a bit of a mess, and if they want to make money for their department, they're supposed to go, and they could go timber. And the other, so that gives me pause about what their true motive is. And the other thing is, these people who are charge right now, like Bob Boyles, they're really short term. I mean, they're probably, if there's a new administration, they won't be there. So this short term fix for them is not looking at the long term picture for the forest. And I don't think they're being real honest with us, because I don't think they've given enough time for public comment. They just sprang this plan on the public with no real time to comment on it. So, call me skeptical.
Am I wrong on this, but hasn't Boyles been there for quite some time?
Not that,
Not as chief,
Not as chief.
no.
not as chief.
But he's been in the Division of
Yeah.
Forestry for 30 years, 30 plus years.
But 30 years, he's gonna retire soon. I mean, he's not gonna be around to answer these questions.
So Tom, there's a question over here.
I'd like to know, Eric, because I've been interested in what you're interested in for a long time, but when Dan and I have my place down there in Capitol, and we go for rides all the time we go for rides. So we go over to the camp that's across, that's where the beach is, where the horses can live in. And every time we go there, we say, what are they doing to the trees? It's just impossible. I mean, they have trees and trees cut down. And then we go back in a couple of weeks, and the first thing we say is, what's happening to all our trees? Well, as it turns out, I don't know if we're talking about that area of trees, you know what I mean?
That's owned by Muscangum, that's not,
You're
you're talking Pleasant Hill Lake Park is.
Muskingum Watershed
Right.
Conservancy now has a substantial sum of money. And my understanding is, I don't know if it's correct or not, that they're gonna put $10.5 million into the expansion of camping and boating facilities at Pleasant Hill. Right now, well, last spring, they cleared out a substantial area for 50 additional campsites. Now you have these concrete pads for people to put their trailers. My understanding is they will put in another 100 campsites. They will put in an in-ground pool. Our concern is the invasive species might be human. They keep expanding that, and after all, that's only a roughly 800 acre lake, and we're bringing more, and I'm not against the creation of beauty, which, I mean, we're a beautiful spot there, but the Conservancy's bringing more people in. Now we're permitting fracking going on. What are we gonna end up doing there? We keep putting more and more and more and more people in, and the demand seems to be, well, let's clear out some more of the forest and we'll put people in there.
Well, I think you spoke to some broader concerns, but we are going to try to limit this panel to the Mohican.
I'm sorry to bring that up, but it's a concern with.
It resonated with the crowd.
That's another meeting, another time, another division.
Another forum, another time.
Yeah, the geography's not as clear to everyone, at least
Right.
it isn't to me, so that's fine.
There's a fellow in back there who's had his hand up quite a bit.
Okay.
Go ahead, you.
Oh, me? Sure. My name is Greg Marsano. I'm just a graduate student in environmental law and policy. So I just want to ask the panel if you were able to come up with a Division of Forestry management plan for, say, 50, 100 years, relatively short time in forest management. What would you envision as what Mohican would look like then? What would you work for as stewards to manage the forest to look like in 50 to 100 years? In your opinion. I mean, it doesn't have to be expertise.
I'd be glad to tell you that. And I would urge the state to commit all of the land that's currently under the Division of Forestry, which means it's run in essence by tree farmers, And I would say instead transfer it to the Division of Parks and to the Division of Natural Areas and Preserves. Manage it for old growth and preserve it as an old growth forest. And by doing that, you would be enhancing the tourism industry. You would be enhancing the local economies. And old growth forest is the rarest ecosystem we have in Ohio. The rarest major ecosystem we have is old growth forest. So, and coincidentally, as I mentioned to you, people who go to a forest, they want to see big trees. They don't want to see big tree stumps. And so that would be the way to get the best return out of that forest.
Are there other state parks in Ohio that are surrounded by forests like Mohican?
Yes, there are quite a number. Shawnee State Park also has an adjacent forest. Hocking Hills. Hocking Hills has a lot of the same concerns that we have right now with forestry. They're having the same issues. There are large areas. Hocking is very well known as a tourist area. 2 years ago, there was a cut where they literally clear-cut the trail going up to and into a state nature preserve. So this is not just an issue that Mohican's having with the Division of Forestry. We're seeing this happening over and over. In Shawnee State Forest, there's a very well-traveled area called Picnic Point. And again, that's where forestry chose to put a forest road and clear cut. And I'm not sure what the name about Picnic Point makes you think that would be a good place to timber, but that's what happened.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Julie Powell Albright. I'm a fungi person, so I do mushroom information presentations in several places. Shawnee is one of them. And we also have horses, so a lot of times we're going to do this presentations, we love to take our horses and we can ride and, you know, get the whole atmosphere of everything. When we rode at Shawnee, it was terrible. When we got up to the top where they had clear cut, the heat from the clear cut was so hot that, and there was no water up there at all for anybody, horses, people, anything. It ran quite a long ways. Our horses were just dripping with sweat by the time we got back. The place is a mess. It really, really is sad to look at it. And then their answer is always, well, it will come back. Whose lifetime? Whose lifetime? Who wants to be here? We're not going to be here. If it does come back, hopefully maybe it'll be there for our great-grandkids. But we're not going to see those large oak trees or anything like that. And I have just an idea. We ride all over in different states. We go to Indiana. In Indiana, you have to have a bridle pack. You have to pay for that yearly. The parks are $25 and the forests are $35. You buy those passes and you can ride all year, whatever you want to do, wherever you want to go. That's income that's coming in. Now, to that, say, okay, so the horse riders, the bikers, the runners, whoever wants to help support Mohican financially. This is an idea, I want to give it to them and say, okay, we'll do this and then still cut. You know, it's kind of a double-edged sword. So that's kind of what I would like to see initiated if, and I know all the horse people that I'm affiliated with would be glad to do it. And there was also plans for a campground in Mohican. I've seen those plans with Don Vaughn, who used to be forest manager there. I would like to see that activated somehow. Like, the only other place to stay is Pleasant Hill, and it's getting kind of scary down there with your horses because they've cleared over here, they've cleared over there, they took these trails out, they took that trails out. So you got a little pathway out to basically Malabar. It's okay, but I'd much rather ride Mohican. My late husband and I opened the trail system from 12 miles that it was to about 28 miles when we were done with opening up that with Don Bond. So I have a deep interest in it, and my heart belongs to Mohican. That's just an idea. Throw that on that idea.
We have a question over here.
Yeah, my name's Teresa Clark, and I'm from Loudonville. And I'm a tax-paying citizen, and all of you are. We need to be questioning why the Division of Forestry is not here tonight. We are paying for them. This is our land. We all need to remember that. This is our forest. We have a say in how it's managed, and right now, if I was a teacher, if I was grading them, I would give them an F. I've been walking these forests, and I am very displeased. If you get in there and you see, this is a lot different seeing it on a piece of paper, but you walk in there, you want evidence of what they're doing, go into the demonstration area where they're educating us of what they're doing. And you will have your eyes open because it's horrendous. Twice we have met with the manager of Mohican, Chad Sanders, and we have been trying to get him to take us and to explain the areas that they have already cut that are being supposedly managed, which they're not, and he did not want to go in there. And I said, is it because you're not proud of that? And in so many words, he admitted, yeah, that clear cut, as we've seen in these pictures, it's horrendous. It's ugly. If Mohican looked like that, we would lose all the tourism money in this area because nobody would be coming here. It's filling with invasives, and they say we don't have money, we don't have resources. Well, then the money that they do have needs to be put into protecting what we have left. Those invasives are a cancer. They are invading the woods. Anybody who's a private landowner, if you go on anybody's land that's been cut, they will tell you it's filling up with garlic mustard, with bush honeysuckle that they've talked about. And it's spreading, and if we don't take care of that, we are not going to have a future forest for our future generations. And back to the process, this is my awakening to how government works, and I'm shocked. I've been made many phone calls. We have called ODNR, we've met with our representative. I'm appalled. I'm appalled that this is our government. These are people we are paying to represent us. The forest is a very special place for my family and I. We need this. That's why you see, coming from Loudonville, every weekend people are flying through there with their, all different forms of recreation, but they're coming for these trees. And if we don't wake up, if we do not say we are paying attention and this is not okay, on this draft, if anybody's looked at Chad Sanders' draft of his plan for his 5-year management, there's a little date he forgot to delete. That's April 19th. Well, that's when he submitted this. He finished it. We, the public, did not hear about this until the end of August. So we just happened to know a few insiders who said, hey, wait a minute, something's happening here. What it is ain't exactly clear, but it's becoming clear. This was an agreed upon plan. These people worked 3 years of their lives, one meeting a month, to come up with this. Our governor at that time, the director of the OTNR, along with public interest, including Annette, Steve McKee, and other people, this was our agreement. We gave them their little demonstration zones, which we've seen evidence of what they've done with those, and that wasn't good enough. So back here, April 19th, this was submitted. Well, we asked Chad, he said, well, I don't know why you're concerned about that date. Well, first of all, we, the public, who are stakeholders, he said we had to let stakeholders know about this. Aren't we stakeholders? The Ad-Hoc committee was not considered a stakeholder. They were not told about this until we, the public, another stakeholder, found out about this. And so we wonder, how far back before that was Chad Sanders and ODNR working on changing this agreement that we, the people, had? And now, if you ask Chad in one of our meetings, he says, you will notice it's really not that different. Anybody who's seen this, which we had to go in and ask him for a copy of this so you could see it side by side. That's not public information. You have to go in and ask for that. But this, they've increased the amount of area in green that they are allowed to log. That's increased. He said by a few acres. Well, that's 100. That's a lot of land. I would love to have 100 acres of woods. And the amount of protected area in the bright pink, that has gone down by over 1,000. That's not okay. I am not okay with that. We who are here, we need to spread the word. The comment period, what's the rush? Why aren't they here? They have nothing to hide. Where are they? Why are they not here? Is we need. So we don't say, well, it's only one-sided. We don't want it one-sided. They have their chance here, and you know there should be another table here, but they're not here. Why is that? Why aren't they here? I'm not okay with this, and we all need to be upset about this because there are a lot of things distracting us in our lives, and we all need this. And they can't just get away with saying, oh, comment period's over. You weren't even aware of that? That's not okay. We tried, many of us called and said, Bob Boyles, and said, what's the rush? The public needs to know about this. Before this meeting, how many of you knew about this? Anybody? A few? Not many. People we are talking to, they don't know about this, and yet we are paying these people, and they've said, nope, here's the end of it. We'll still take comment. And if you ask anybody who's in ODNR, what they say is, comment is, oh yeah, here's where we'll file it, in the trash can, because the official period is done.
What's the schedule going forward? What happens next?
Thank you, Tom. I'll just say, unfortunately, our schedule is we need to end this at 7:30, so we have very little time left. There are, for those of you who want to comment, we have these guide sheets to use for comments, but you can always use the telephone or write your own letter. But those will be out front. Robin has them, and or you can get some from Annette. But our schedule here tonight is we need to end this at 7:30 and deliver possession of the room a little bit after that. So,
Can I ask one question?
He's not had a question before, so Tom, maybe make this.
My question of you wasn't the schedule for us, but the schedule for the state. What comes next in terms of their decision-making process, implementation? Who has to approve this? What's the rest of the schedule for that?
Okay, the official comment period ended already. We are hopeful they'll continue to take comment and that they'll extend it. The director, Bob Boyles, will submit his recommendation to a forestry council. Consists of I believe 6 or 7 people appointed by the governor. They will likely approve his recommendation, and then the Division of Forestry will begin to implement its plan. That's the likely schedule. Of course, we're hopeful that with continued public comment, we can forestall that and prevent it.
where do our state representatives fit into that?
That's your best option. If you get one of these forms, it will give you an address for your state representative, also to the state senate, Larry Oboff, who is not only Richland County, but Ashland County. That is your best option. If you don't talk to your politicians who are actually the bosses over the Division of Forestry, ultimately, that's your best option. If you have an interest.
Were they invited tonight?
Pardon?
Were they invited tonight?
We've been trying for 3 weeks to get them to join us for a forum, and they've never said yes.
Our
They've never said no.
politicians?
Oh,
Yes,
I'm sorry,
they were
they were
invited.
informed, the
I invited
politicians
two of
were,
them.
yeah, but they've got tons of demands on their schedule.
But they were
So,
invited.
Just real quick.
Yeah, one last question here, Tom, and then we do need to wrap it up and deliver the room
Can I
check.
have your attention, please? The library will be closing in 30 minutes.
Sorry, too late.
Annette stated that the last time they did the big sale, and there was that $8,000 some odd deficit, which the taxpayers ate. Okay, we absorbed that loss. And the sale was kind of botched, and ended up going to Canada. So the sale now, where they're doing this timbering, where's the wood going? Who's buying that?
Well, they haven't cut yet, but they will be removing pine and stacking it, and then, as I say, it gets sold by the ton for a relatively small amount. And anyone's free to bid on it.
Yeah.
Okay?
So like a contractor, subcontractor type bid process?
Sure, someone who has the ability to truck it, it's gonna get picked up, hauled someplace, shredded, and then used for various forest products. That's where the pine will go. And with that, I'll just say, as we clear the room, we're around if anyone wants to approach us individually, but we're gonna keep our commitment to the library.
And I want to thank you all for your participation in the questions and the conversation. Thank you.